And I am tired of having to prove myself. I am tired of having to defend my family. I am tired of being overworked.
With just a simple phone call, 4 years of hard work ended in under 5 minutes. For 4 seasons, Egypt Sherrod and Mike Jackson built a beloved show that pulled millions of viewers every single week, until it suddenly went sideways in June 2025. While still at the airport unloading bags from a Mediterranean family vacation, the devastating call came through, followed by months of silence and then chaos that the public had no idea was building until Egypt Sherrod started speaking. What did she reveal? Join us as we uncover the behind-the-scenes details. The show that broke every rule HGTV had written. Egypt Sherrod had been part of the HGTV family long before Married to Real Estate ever existed. Starting out as the youngest music director in radio history at 19 years old, building a career as the #1 personality at New York City's WBLS 107.5, where interviews with Prince, Tyler Perry, and Oprah became part of the resume, and then transitioning into real estate and television in a way that almost nobody does successfully. The show Property Virgins gave HGTV more than a decade of reliable content. Flipping Virgins followed. Then came the pandemic, a camera in Mike Jackson's hand, and the kind of authentic, unscripted content that television executives dream about discovering. Married to Real Estate premiered on HGTV in January 2022 and immediately became something the network had not seen in a very long time from an African-American family in the home renovation space. According to HGTV, the show attracted approximately 19 million viewers, and Egypt Sherrod herself noted in interviews that historically, no African-American family had ever carried an HGTV show past a single season before Married to Real Estate went 4. It was a landmark achievement that the show's hosts were acutely aware of, carrying on their shoulders every single time the cameras rolled. The couple won Season 3 of Rock the Block in 2022, building the highest-selling home in the competition's history. The show was airing in 82 countries by the 4th season. A Daytime Emmy nomination arrived for instructional and how-to programming, delivered with extraordinary irony only after the cancellation had already been announced. Season 3 alone generated 16.5 million viewers and was available on Max for streaming. By any conventional television measurement, this was not a show in trouble. It was a show that was working, growing, and doing something culturally meaningful in a space where that combination is genuinely rare. So how does a show with that kind of foundation end with a phone call in an airport parking lot? And why did the people who built it feel the need to warn audiences that the truth behind the ending was something worth waiting to hear? The behind-the-scenes chaos nobody was talking about. While audiences were watching 4 seasons of warm family television and beautifully renovated Atlanta homes, something very different was happening behind the scenes during the production of the final season. The warning signs were there for anyone close enough to see them, but television audiences rarely get access to the machinery running underneath the finished product. And in this case, that machinery had started breaking down in ways that had direct consequences for the show's future. Egypt Sherrod and Mike Jackson revealed in an October 2025 interview with People magazine that by the time the 4th season began filming, not a single member of the original production team from seasons 1, 2, or 3 remained on the show. Every familiar face in the production infrastructure had been replaced, creating a working environment that felt fundamentally different from the one that had produced 3 successful seasons of content. The couple had returned from their 14th anniversary trip to Costa Rica to discover the original team had been removed entirely in their absence, a discovery that landed with the kind of gut punch that is difficult to describe to anyone who has not experienced it. The new production team brought immediate and tangible problems: communication with the clients whose homes were being renovated, deteriorated to the point where Egypt and Mike were spending personal funds out of pocket to ensure the work was being completed properly and the clients were being kept informed. Production shutdowns, referred to internally as dark weeks, created significant delays that rippled outward and affected the audience's awareness of when the show was returning. Fans who did not know what was happening behind the scenes began wondering openly whether the show was even coming back, and that uncertainty translated directly into the kind of audience engagement numbers that network executives watch very carefully. The couple described feeling, in their own words, moved over by the new team. Perspectives that had been respected across 3 seasons were no longer being heard. The sense of creative partnership that had defined the show's identity was replaced by a dynamic that left the two people whose names were on the show feeling like guests in their own production. The experience was disorienting and demoralizing in equal measure, especially for people who had built their entire professional reputation on the quality and authenticity of what they delivered to clients and audiences alike. With the production crumbling internally and the couple spending their own money to hold things together, a second wave of chaos was forming in an entirely different direction. What happens when false stories about a marriage start spreading while the actual marriage is being tested by everything happening off camera? The fake headlines that made everything worse. Everything described was already creating serious pressure on Married to Real Estate before a single viewer knew anything was wrong. Then the internet decided to add an entirely different layer of chaos to an already difficult situation. Rumors about the state of the marriage between Egypt Sherrod and Mike Jackson began circulating across social media with the kind of velocity that only happens when an audience is already paying close attention and a vacuum of official information creates space for speculation to fill. The rumors did not emerge from any credible source. According to the couple, the false stories about separation and divorce appeared to be generated entirely from stalled programming updates, vague online accounts, claiming insider knowledge, and the natural tendency of audiences to assume the worst when a show they love goes quiet without explanation. But the damage those stories caused was real, regardless of their origin. Fans flooded comment sections with concerned questions. The already challenging work of filming a 4th season under a completely new production team was now also being done while managing the noise of a manufactured marital crisis playing out publicly in parallel. Mike Jackson addressed it directly and without ambiguity in an August 2025 Instagram video, stating clearly that any claims about a return to HGTV or about the state of the marriage that did not come directly from the couple themselves should be treated as fiction. The video itself served as the rebuttal that words alone could not fully deliver. Two people who had supposedly been on the brink of divorce appeared on camera shoulder to shoulder, relaxed and laughing, making the gap between the tabloid narrative and the visible reality impossible to miss for anyone watching with honest eyes. Egypt and Mike also confirmed in that same August video that something new was being filmed, careful not to share details about platform or format, but clear about the direction being forward rather than backward. The phrase used was direct, not going backwards, only forwards. For a couple who had spent months navigating a production collapse, a cancellation delivered at an airport, and a social media rumor cycle about their marriage, that statement carried considerably more weight than it might appear to on the surface. But the marriage rumors and the production chaos were not even the most emotionally charged chapter of what Egypt Sherrod was dealing with during this period. What was waiting just weeks after the cancellation news would prove far heavier than any of it. The grief nobody saw coming. Television cancellations carry their own particular sting, especially when they arrive without warning to people who built something real and watched it grow. But the summer of 2025 delivered a different and deeper kind of loss. To Egypt Sherrod, that had nothing to do with HGTV, ratings, or production teams. Just weeks after the cancellation was announced publicly, the death of an estranged father arrived, and with it a grief that was complicated in ways that straightforward loss rarely is. In a July 2025 Instagram post, Egypt Sherrod disclosed that the father had passed away, and that due to a complicated relationship, there had been no contact for 15 years before the end came. The post described the absence of anger, the forgiveness that had already been extended long before the death, and the quiet resignation of two people who had drifted so far from each other's lives that reconciliation had simply never happened, not from lack of willingness necessarily, but from the accumulation of time and distance until the gap became too wide to cross. Without someone making a deliberate move, neither party ultimately made in time. The post captured something that resonates with anyone who has experienced estrangement: the particular grief of losing a relationship that was already gone before the person died, and the pain of realizing that the conversation once assumed could happen one day simply ran out of time. The words used were honest and unguarded, in a way that clearly touched something in the audience. Fans flooded the comment section with their own parallel experiences. People who recognized in that post the specific texture of losing someone who was never quite fully present, even while alive. What makes that loss particularly significant in the context of everything else happening during that period is the timing. A show cancellation, a production betrayal, a marriage subjected to false public scrutiny, a surgery, and a subsequent injury, both happening within weeks of each other, and now the permanent closing of a door that had remained technically open for 15 years. Any single one of those events would constitute a significant life disruption. Together, compressed into a matter of months, they created a weight that most people would struggle to carry without showing it. And yet Egypt Sherrod kept showing up, working and communicating with the audience that had followed the journey, which makes the moment when the full frustration finally came pouring out all the more significant to understand. The moment Egypt Sherrod stopped being careful with her words. For much of the difficult period surrounding the cancellation, Egypt Sherrod communicated with the characteristic grace and faith-forward framing that her audience had come to expect. The cancellation statement itself was generous, expressing gratitude across multiple paragraphs before acknowledging that the chain of events leading to the ending was disheartening. The tone was measured. The anger, if it existed, was not on public display. Then came April 2025, before the cancellation had even been officially announced, and the New York Times published a piece about the home renovation television landscape that used Egypt Sherrod's image as its centerpiece, while describing the show in ways that cut deeply into a decade of professional credibility. The article, titled around the theme of home renovation television broadly, described the production as a well-oiled machine where the hosts breezed in to perform work for the cameras before leaving, framing the entire enterprise as performance rather than the genuine real estate and renovation operation it had always been presented as. Egypt Sherrod's response came from a client's property on a Sunday, still in work clothes, with a wall that still needed lime washing nearby and no camera crew in sight, delivered with the kind of raw, unfiltered frustration that clearly had been building for considerably longer than one article could account for. The words delivered were direct and specific. Tired of proving worthiness, tired of being overworked and underpaid, tired of being left out of press coverage and licensing deals, and invitations that went to comparable shows without the same fight required to earn them. The thesis statement that followed carried the weight of everything underneath it. The observation that the black woman is unprotected was not offered as an abstract cultural comment. It was a personal declaration from someone describing the lived experience of watching a thriving black family's television show get less protection, less recognition, and less fair treatment than the work consistently merited. The erasure element of the grievance was specific and visible. The New York Times piece had run with only Egypt Sherrod's face, despite Mike Jackson standing beside the reporter during the entire interview and working in the background throughout. For a couple whose entire professional identity is built on partnership, having that partnership literally edited out of the resulting coverage was not a small editorial oversight. It was a rewriting of the truth that happened to be preserved on a published page. The New York Times stood by the reporting. The article's framing was defended as thorough and fair, and the tension between those two positions, between a media institution's confidence in its own work and a creator's experience of being fundamentally misrepresented by it, is the kind of unresolvable gap that tends to linger long after the specific incident has moved out of the news cycle. But all of that frustration, the article, the erasure, the years of fighting for equal treatment in a space that was not built with equal treatment as a default setting, was a precursor to an even bigger silence that was about to be broken. What exactly had been happening in those quiet months between the cancellation and the moment Egypt Sherrod started filming new content with a message about moving forward? The surgery, the injury, and the refusal to stop. If 2025 was the year that delivered the cancellation, the false headlines, the father's death, and the New York Times confrontation, it ended with a physical reckoning that seemed almost designed to test how much one person could absorb before stopping entirely. In January 2026, following weeks of unexplained social media silence that had already generated its own round of fan speculation, Egypt Sherrod broke the silence with an update that explained what the absence had actually been about. Surgery had required 5 weeks of complete withdrawal from public life and social media, described as a scary road that the recovery was still navigating. The specifics of the procedure were not disclosed in detail, but the language used. 5 weeks of complete focus on healing following something that qualified as frightening made clear this was not a minor or routine matter. For someone who had maintained consistent audience communication through everything described in the months prior, 5 weeks of silence represented a genuine departure from the pattern that fans had come to rely on. Then, just as mobility was returning and the recovery appeared to be progressing toward some version of normal, a piece of marble fell from a counter onto the foot and shattered 2 toes. The response to that development was characteristic. The language used described it as evidence of the devil being a liar. The toes were broken, but walking was still happening without a cast or boot, and the calendar was consulted to confirm that technically all of this had still happened in 2025, the year of the snake, meaning none of it was being carried forward into 2026 energetically. The humor in that framing was real, but so was the exhaustion underneath it. By February 2026, the social media posts had shifted into something that felt less like updates and more like declarations. A post about the design approach for the new year stated plainly that the work ahead would be designed from testimony rather than trends, from quiet battles and prayers whispered over blueprints and tears that had taught a new way of seeing light. The language was not the language of someone preparing a polished comeback narrative. It was the language of someone who had genuinely been through something and was finding that the experience had changed the creative foundation in ways that could not and would not be hidden. The tease buried in a reply to a fan who expressed grief over the cancellation was 3 words long. God is doing a new thing. And given everything that had happened in the preceding 12 months, those 3 words were carrying an extraordinary amount of weight behind them. After everything that happened, the question the audience has been asking since June 2025 deserves an honest answer. Is Married to Real Estate actually over? And what does the future look like for the people who built it? The show as it existed on HGTV is finished, and the couple has been direct about that reality without bitterness. Egypt Sherrod owns the trademark to the Married to Real Estate name, a detail that becomes significant when the conversation turns to what might come next. The statement made publicly in October 2025 was unambiguous about not wanting to return to templated television simply for the sake of being back on a screen. The desire expressed was either to create the next phase on terms that genuinely reflect what the brand has become, or not to return to television at all. What has been confirmed is that filming is happening. The couple has been deliberately careful about not disclosing platform details or format specifics, but the confirmation that cameras are rolling and the content being created is something they are actively excited about suggests a project with genuine creative investment behind it, rather than a reactive attempt to fill the gap left by the HGTV cancellation. The podcast, Marriage and Money, relaunched in December 2025, has given the audience a consistent point of connection while the larger television question resolves itself. So, what do you think about the way HGTV handled the cancellation of Married to Real Estate? And do you believe Egypt Sherrod and Mike Jackson will come back with something bigger than what the network was willing to give them? Share your thoughts with us in the comment section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.